Now, we saw the shocking arrest of anti-monarchy protesters. Why wouldn't a Labour government repeal the Public Order Act? I mean, if Labour... the whole history of Labour is a history of protest.
Well, I think there are two things going on here. On the one hand, I think most people say the police need powers to deal with Just Stop Oil and some of their tactics. They do need powers to deal with that. But on the other hand, there's a balance to be had, which is to protect free and peaceful protest. Operational decisions were made over the weekend. Some were right, some were wrong. The police themselves accepted that a number of them were wrong. That needs to be a learning experience. Legislation needs to bed down.
But you won't repeal the Act?
Well, I think we need to let it bed in. Yeah. We need to look at how it operates in practice. Very often with public order legislation, as you know.
That's strange. That's strange that he's saying that he wants the legislation to bed in his own words, explicitly saying, yes, Mr. Peston, I also agree that we are not going to repeal the Public Order Bill, despite what James O'Brien and friend of the show Phil Morehouse were claiming in their little pieces on the subject. It's very interesting as well, in that both Phil and James O'Brien, the point that they were making was actually, no, well, you can't just repeal everything, right? Apart from, important draconian pieces of completely liberal legislation that fly in the face of the basic protections that should be laid out in one of the theoretically the bastions of democracy in the world. Obviously that is a misnomer, but people perceive the UK as a bastion of democracy, a bastion of liberal democracy, the cradle of liberalism, right? I would think that would be on the top of my list of things that I would want to try and repeal when I got into government, unless, of course, I, as Prime Minister, wanted to use those powers, potentially, right? Or didn't actually genuinely believe in the right to freedom to protest or anything like that. And I just only, basically, as I've said before, will literally say anything and everything that they can to get into power. And it's interesting that, Phil and James O'Brien and the segments that they did, Phil did a whole fucking segment on this shit, saying people just jumping to conclusions from a statement that David Lammy said about not repealing the bill, but then also said, in the other half of his video, oh, well, actually, it's fine because they shouldn't have to bother repealing it anyway because they should be focusing on something else. But also the people who jumped on the soundbite are wrong. Well, touche, Phil. Right, the soundbite has now been cleared up specifically by Keir Starmer saying that he will not repeal it, and he thinks that the additional powers being given to the police are good and should be used, and he wants the legislation to bed in, right? Let's go over specifically what Mr. James O'Brien was saying with regards to this, and how now indeed Egg and his face are in alignment. Let's listen to what James O'Brien had to say in response to these terrible allegations against the Labour Party.
Well, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed in Keir Starmer not saying he's going to overturn this latest bit of legislation.
No, that's unfortunately a misapprehension. I think that was a consequence of David Lammy saying something on LBC over the weekend.
Yes, I did hear him say that.
And what happens is, I'll explain this to you because it's actually quite important, and it's a mark, of course, of how far LBC has come in recent years. You have some very strange people out there who spend their days desperately trying to resurrect the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn. So David Lammy says something.
Which is interesting, because it seems to me, James, like it is indeed you are the one who are desperate to continue to make everything about Jeremy Corbyn, because at no point in any of this discussion was Jeremy Corbyn even mentioned, right? No, Jeremy Corbyn does not played upon any of these discussions. It was just people, including liberals, right? Liberals who fundamentally disagree with the political positions that I hold. People like, I don't know, like Supertansky or whatever it is, India Willoughby, for example. Common Garden liberals who also said that it's an absolute damning indictment on the Labour Party that they're not going to repeal the Public Order Bill. It is not just the people who are in your replies on Twitter, James. This does indeed show that he got exactly what he wanted, to be sure. But the fact that he's, again, just yet another centrist pundit is so brain poisoned by the Corbyn years. They think literally everybody who disagrees with them is obsessed with Corbyn. And to be fair, pot kettle, quite frankly.
Off the cuff and out of context on LBC, and one of these weirdos clips it up and puts it out as proof that the Labour Party isn't going to be repealing any of this, and they're not going to be doing anything at all to remove legislation that they actually voted against in the first place. But the Labour...
What's interesting as well is that Labour were very vociferous in the fact that they were voting against the Public Order Bill in the Commons, right? They made it very clear that they opposed the Public Order Bill as being against liberal democracy, and they wanted to stand up for the right to protest when they were voting against it in the Commons, when they knew that the bill was going to pass regardless. What happened, chat? Pray tell what happened when the same bill, with some amendments, was passing through the Lords. Did the Labour Party whip to oppose the bill in the Lords by any chance, given the powers that were being used over the weekend were the ones still in the bill that were not amended out? Did the Labour Party whip the Labour Lords to oppose the bill, or did they actually indeed abstain on the bill so that it could get passed into royal assent, when the only time they actually had to stop it, they didn't even put their ability to be able to vote against it to good use? It's weird how they will do performative things in the Commons, and then as soon as the actual ability for them to oppose the legislation happens, Suddenly it's time for them to abstain. And now they're being questioned on whether or not they would repeal it in government. They come out with an ambiguous position to start with. And all the liberal centrists go, yeah, 100% absolutely, we will definitely get repealed. It's just leftoids on the internet taking a statement out of context. Clearly, our man, the Starmer, he will indeed follow my principles in opposing and then also repealing this legislation when he's in power. And then Mr. Starmer comes along and says, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Stadlin, perhaps, Mr. Dunt. Unfortunately, I am the wallet inspector, and it is time, Mr. Morehouse, for you to present your wallet for inspection. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Starmer. I didn't realise it was wallet inspection day. Here you go. I hope everything's in order. And then he comes out the very next day, and says that he was not going to be repealing the public order bill, and he wants the legislation to bed in, and that he agrees with the additional police powers to arrest peaceful protesters. He literally, in the interview we just watched, he literally said the police need powers to stop Just Stop Oil. There you go. Straight from the horse's mouth.
The Labour have since clarified that is not the case at all. Not that it will get tweeted by all the clowns who came across your path or whose path you came across over the weekend, because they're too busy trying to pass electric shock therapy through the corpse of Jeremy Corbyn's political career. But hey-ho, it's up to us to get...
I love how, again, the Liberals can only see things through personalities. There's such weak and such kind of vapid political analysis from the liberal centrist types in the media who go, oh, it must all be about Jeremy Corbyn. Oh, these people are just cultists who just love Jeremy Corbyn, love him specifically. And it's not indeed about the policies or the actual, ideology behind any of these things, or the principle or the utility around what the people should or shouldn't stand for as political candidates. I'm sure, right? I'm 100% sure that the Jeremy Corbyn fans in the audience, if Keir Starmer came out and said, no, what? I was wrong to U-turn on my pledges. I was wrong to kick socialists out of the Labour Party. You can come back into the party. I will support the platform that I stood on during the Labour leadership election. And I guarantee you that all the Corbyn fans would immediately turn tail and say, look, if you want to actually support the policies that we support, we will get behind you. But of course he doesn't want to do that because he fundamentally doesn't believe in any of that shit. Hence why all the pledges have gone into the dustbin of history, along with all criticism of Keir Starmer from the Liberals rather than the Liberal left. Right? Because they won't criticise him anymore, because that means you're on the blue team. Because all that matters is the team sports angle. You have to only say good things about the red team and bad things about the blue team. And then here we are right now, where they fundamentally think, well, actually, if people are opposing what Keir Starmer's doing, it must be because they're obsessed with Corbyn. When, no, really, we just want to see the public order bill repealed, because that should be a basic fucking principle of the Labour Party. There's a great Harold Wilson quote, actually. The Labour Party is a moral crusade, or it is nothing. And I'm getting a good sense of nothing here from Keir Starmer. The vibe I'm getting from Keir Starmer here is indeed nothing. Because he's not, what moral crusade, what moral principles does that man fucking believe in? He's got no moral scruples whatsoever, because he believes in one thing and one thing only, and that is winning on what, doesn't matter how many pledges he has to break, no matter how much he has to completely incinerate his own moral compass, he just wants to win. And not just against the Conservatives, but against people who oppose him in his own party as well. That's all he fucking cares about. And then, today, James O'Brien has woken up with egg on his face. Egg and his face are in alignment. So let's have a look at what he has to say on the gigantic U-turn on position that he now has to take. The humiliating climb down of the people, of the Liberals who continually expect Keir Starmer to do the things that they believe him to do, rather than the things that he actually believes in himself. Let's have a listen to how James O'Brien's going to climb his way out of the moral quagmire he has so deeply sunk himself into.
Caused great delight. I don't know if you saw. I caused great delight in the darker corners of the internet yesterday by explaining at about 12:30 why the Labour Party hadn't actually pledged or refused to confirm that they would repeal this bill. And then about 4 hours later, Keir Starmer on Robert Peston's programme did sort of refuse to pledge that they would repeal this.
No, by sort of refused to pledge to repeal this bill. I mean, he didn't. He did the opposite, right? He pledged not to. He said he wasn't going to repeal the bill. He was going to let it bed in, and said he supported the powers that the police were being given in the way that they were used over the weekend. Like, this is full on, like, magic beans, just shaking the magic beans over at James O'Brien. He's purchased timeshares in Magic Bean Land. That's what he really has done, right? He's purchased the bridge over the river into the timeshare that he has purchased in Magic Bean Land, and hired a whole army of wallet inspectors at the same time.
Bill, and he does that for reasons that are obvious to anyone paying attention. He does that so that Rishi Sunak cannot stand up for the next 18 months and say Keir Starmer is siding with the protesters. And it depends on the protest, because siding with some protesters is not going to be politically damaging. It might be politically advantageous. The same with strikers.
Yep.
But to have that rhetorical...
Also, is James O'Brien also coming out that it is the correct 5D chess move to also not stand with striking workers as the leader of the fucking Labour Party, because it might be a way he might be attacked by Rishi Sunak in the press, rather than having a moral principle to stand behind, right? And again, either people can either everyone has protests or nobody does. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that.
Device in your back pocket every week, and having the newspapers, of course, more powerfully queuing up all the time to say he sides with the protesters, and then you get a protest that you hate, and then you as a voter see Keir Starmer as being in your enemy's camp. I'd be amazed if they don't come back to this bill that they voted against when they are actually in power. But until they are in power, he's going to sit on his hands.
Yeah, it's almost like this is just gigantic levels of copium from someone who does not want to admit that he's a fucking idiot, and that he's trying to find literally any way that he can to absolve the fact internally that he's backed the wrong horse. That he knows that on basically every single thing he wants Keir Starmer to do, he's reneged on, and he knows that he is just basically supporting a carbon copy of the Conservative Party, down to rhetoric, ideology, policy supporting these supports. And Phil is identical, right? Every one of these people who they are so in bed with the Labour right that they refuse to even see the mildest of criticisms, or even entertain the mildest of criticisms. And it's the sunk cost fallacy in action. It's the sunk cost fallacy in the most sharpest of reliefs you've ever seen in your life. All these people going, oh, well, hang on a minute, we've all backed the horse of Starmer fundamentally because we wanted to kill Corbynism and kill left-wing political ideology and its ability to be able to agitate for left-wing political ideology in the public sphere. We wanted to kill that, and we've done that. And we also wanted to ensure that liberal media hegemony and liberal policy hegemony had supreme control over the entirety of the public discourse as the Overton window shifts right. They wanted it, and they fucking got it. And the result of them getting the Overton window shifting to the right, we now have one of the most authoritarian, draconian governments in recent history. And it's only been allowed to happen because the ground has been entirely ceded to the Conservative Party by the Labour Party capitulating on all areas of policy and ideology with regards to authoritarianism, and on economics, no less, as well. And they've got to find some way of justifying sinking that cost themselves. And quite frankly, I have far more respect for people like Supetansky coming out and saying that Keir Starmer refusing to back the repeal of this draconian legislation makes him having powerful enemies. Obviously, I think the phrasing is cringe, but at least she has principles that that's a line that's worth crossing, right? That once Keir Starmer hits that, he's crossed a line and he's suddenly lost these people's support. At least Supetansky says, this is a line, Keir Starmer has crossed it. Whereas people like Phil and people like James O'Brien, right, these mealy-mouthed fucking sycophants for the Labour right, will absolutely, they will sup on his spit, right? They will gladly drink Keir Starmer's urine as he showers them in the awful policy and awful positions and awful ideology that they say they claim to oppose, yet will give full throat support to as long as it's wearing a red tie or a red rosette. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. The thing is, anarcho-racket is I do not think that Supetansky is a grifter. I think she holds all of her positions entirely sincerely. But one of her positions is basically vote red no matter who. And she is very happy to compromise on her principles to support supporting the red team no matter what, right? You know what? I disagree with that position, but at least I understand where she comes from. I at least can see how her thought process have been iterated to get to that point, especially when, she has shown that she has at least some levels of scruple to have those lines, to have those red lines which shouldn't be crossed, and to call out Keir Starmer when he crosses those lines. Unlike Phil, unlike James O'Brien, who will completely be sycophantic towards him regardless of where he even goes. There's always a justification. There's always a 5D chess move. There's always some kind of, fucking mangled reason as to why they have to support Keir Starmer for his right-wing policy, for his monetarist policy, for his neoliberal policy, for his authoritarian policy. They always find a way of being able to have some kind of weird 5D chess justification for why he's doing the right-wing things that he's doing. But at least Supetansky, at least she can see this is bad. This is a fundamental moral principle that I believe in, and crossing that line means that you lose my support. And you know what? I have respect for that. I have respect for that. There are plenty of things that I will disagree with people like Supetansky on. There are plenty of things I think she does that are incredibly fucking cringe, right? But at least she's not so cucked as to just accept whatever Keir Starmer says and does. Which is what people like Phil and James O'Brien are doing. And I'm sorry to rag on these two specifically, because there's a whole host of other people who are identical to this. People like Ian Dunn, people like Matthew Stadlin, or whatever, who I mentioned earlier on in this segment, who are just as cringe, just as sycophantic, just as refusal to critique anything that Keir Starmer does, just as eager to try and relate every single criticism of Starmer back to Jeremy Corbyn as a person, or Jeremy Corbyn as an electoral figure, or Jeremy Corbyn as a politician, rather than the policy or the ideology or the utility of what is being said or what is being proposed. Because that's what it's all about. It is all about policy. It is all about ideology. It is all about utility. That's what I care about. That's what the left care about. And it's what centrists and neoliberals and liberal hacks in the media do not give a shit about. Because it's all self-aggrandizement for these people, right? All self-aggrandizement. And it's pathetic. It's pathetic. That's the only way to describe it. And honestly, really sad and embarrassing. Really embarrassing that these people can't see how they're being played. And I hope that they do indeed look forward to getting exactly what they wanted when in 6 years' time, Reform UK somehow stormed to a surprise general election victory off the back of the fact that everyone has turned fascist because Keir Starmer has done nothing to solve the cost of living crisis, nothing to solve the issue difference between wage remuneration and between rent remuneration in this country, where the working class have not made gains against the ownership class because he refuses to implement wealth taxes, refuses to increase capital gains tax, and refuses to properly back Keynesian economic principles to be able to build the economy from the ground up. And when we are 5 years later, where people have rejected Keir Starmer again because of his failure to deal with the economic malaise of this country, I will be sitting there with the sign that says you got what you wanted, and I will not be happy, I will just be disappointed. It's a political pyramid scheme. Very true, Scribber. That's exactly what it is. I will be the most smug communist in the Labour camp. Very true, JDM. That's exactly what we're going to be. On the re-education camp. I guess I'll probably be in prison in 2031 when Reform UK makes being transgender illegal. Unless, of course, Keir Starmer gets there first. Which you may well do. I'm just editing this segment, and I was reading Twitter, and I've just found out that with the illegal migration bill going through the Lords for its second reading, the Labour Lords will be to abstain on yet another draconian, awful, quite frankly, rancid bill, allowing it to be able to get even closer to royal assent. The Lib Dem Lords voted against it. Only 8 Labour Lords did the same thing. Labour peers said afterwards, if we can be this fucking awful in opposition, how bad are we going to be in government? And I couldn't say fairer than that. It is an absolute shame on the Labour Party that this is the continual position they will take in opposition with some of the most draconian and awful bills I think have ever been passed in the last, since the time when we were detaining people or imprisoning people without trial during the War on Terror. That's how bad things have gotten. And literally, if you read even further down, there were 175 Labour peers. They had Labour peers standing at the entrance to the content lobby for supporting the motion to block the bill, stopping Labour peers from voting that way. Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. And I cannot wait for people like James O'Brien to try and spin this to somehow be some incredible, 27D chess move. When really all it is just capitulation into the absolutely putrid narrative around refugees and asylum seekers that's being driven by an awful government. And quite frankly, how anyone can vote for the Labour Party at this point is beyond me. Completely fucking beyond me. Waste of your time, waste your vote, waste of any political capital that you could exercise by supporting the continual supremacy of this absolutely dogshit ideology. What a waste.